Jane, would you like to make a start?
Yes, sure. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to the sort of a final close down workshop or showcase of the Base 2 event. Sure, all of you have the agenda in front of you, and apologies for slight mixed up in terms of having this event in person and then move to Zoom for various different constraints. So thank you for taking part on this one. So the in agenda wise, I think we're going to really kick off it in terms of basic introduction to what the program is, what we intend to do, and then where we are, and then followed by description of each of the work packages and the achievements on each of the work packages. Yuri will present work package one, and then followed by people from University of Leicester, Ali, Craig, Corentin, and Mark will present the work package two. And for work package three from Cambridge, Bob and Roger would be, next slide, please, Maria. Sorry, I think you don't have the full agenda. Okay. Right. So from Cambridge, Bob and Roger would cover work package three, and then followed by Marion Samler to cover work package four. We intend to run it until 12 o'clock with a short comfort break. So of course, if there are questions, please feel free to post them on the chat or Q&A section, and then we will try and cover at the end of it if at all possible. So let me start with a basic introduction to what the program is. So the Base 2 event really is very much about the blueprinting um, for AI for science, which basically sort of builds on to the first part of the program called Base 1, which is very much focused on the core benchmarking side of it. So these two events, these two programs basically build on the fact that we have large amount of scientific data sort of built into or sort of generated by these large scale facilities. And then AI being a very influential technology, and how do we actually use AI on these workloads to make sense of it? But the driver is basically very much about how do we use it at scale and at exascale, particularly for large scale problems, and then to complement it with the high performance computing. So that's the real premise of it. And then we kickstarted it with the base one, and there's a bit of a story to that, but I'll cover that as we go along. And then this particular program, which is based to, it's a sort of a super version of the benchmarking program, or that's what we call it, blueprinting. Next slide, Marian. So the motivation, I think, if you really look at the overall landscape of the AI, there are a large number of machine learning techniques really coming up almost on a daily basis. And then we have a fairly broader set of scientific challenges across different domains, from material sciences to life sciences to particle physics to astronomy. And then we have quite a variety of hardware systems out in the open, which are very specialized for various different purposes. So the question is, how do we know which one is really better for a given problem and a given architecture? So it's very much about there are a number of things in here. One, of course, we want to look at the what we call a traditional benchmarking sense. We want to look at the performance side of the story, and also the scientific side of the story, where we want to see which method really offers the best scientific advantage or competitive edge compared to other techniques around. So given the dimensionality of the landscape, it's a very complicated thing to do. And we thought, okay, so benchmarking is the right way to know or work with the community to understand where the problems are and how do we understand different methods on different architectures and different problems. So that's a real scope of this one. Marian, next slide, please. And in the base one, what we have done is we started off, it's a very community-driven activity opposed to base two. On activity one, we have sort of developed, we sort of scoped a range of benchmarks. I think some of the people here already been part of that one. And then in activity A2, what we have really done is we sort of identified different problems and data set we can technically make use of it to go further. And then, of course, selected some benchmarks, and then we finalized the benchmark release. So this is about base one, not really about the base two. So Marian, next slide, please. And what we have learned out of the base one is actually, so we learned quite a lot about the importance of the AI benchmarking. So this is to remind back in time, this is roughly about 4 years ago when AI was almost getting into the corners of it, well before the LLM timescale. And then, of course, the importance of the scale of the data on the exascale. So whenever we talk about the exascale, we really very much obsessed about the computing side of it. And then we sort of ignore the fact of the scale of the data. And the base one lessons, one of the lessons out of the base one was about the significance of the data on the exascale space. And very importantly, the benchmarking, the activity of benchmarking can really foster significant advancements in scientific research. By knowing different methods and techniques and which one works better on which type of problems, really encourages particularly the STFC facilities to work on AI space to improve their scientific advances. And then, of course, by working on benchmarks, we also identify additional areas that are important to the exascale initiatives, particularly surrogate modeling. How do we mix HPC and AI together for sustaining performance and techniques like that? Next slide, please, Marian. However, the issue is one of the challenges is given the landscape, how bad the landscape is or how complicated the landscape is. It's almost impossible to kind of curate benchmarks on a daily basis for each and every type of problem we bump into. So this is where we sort of thought, okay, curating the benchmarks will be a never-ending story. We could never complete that mission, even with quite a large amount of communities involved on it. With more AI benchmarking to be useful on the understanding the impact of AI and machine learning on science. So we thought, there are other things we have to kind of account for it. And this is where the notion of blueprinting actually came on. Maria, next slide, please. And if you come to base two, so benchmarking is only a small part of the bigger story when it comes to the, particularly at the exascale. So we thought we will really on the base two, we will really focus on the blueprinting, and what we call a blueprinting is, or blueprints are sort of a very high level, high quality AI-based examples or templates for large scale scalable software. So that's the overall drive. So instead of simple benchmarks that really help us understanding the runtime performance or the training performance or inference performance, we thought we would really come up with some very high level patterns, as we really call it, which other community could actually make use of it to solve their problems in a different domain. So that's the overall drive of it. And of course, taking the performance or understanding the performance is also very important, but equally, it is also important to kind of develop the high level understanding of the different type of problems we work on. And these are 2-year program originally from December 2022 to December 2024, but extended until this end of this March or end of next week. And of course, there are various different, of course, like all of the programs, there are various different work packages. Work package 1 is very much at the STFC. Yuri will cover that part of it. Work package 2 will focus on the surrogate models at University of Leicester. And of course, work package 3 is very much about how do we integrate the hardware and software together to kind of make them better. Bob and Roger would cover that from the Cambridge side of it. And then, of course, finally, how do we bring these things together through various different knowledge exchange activities and training programs, which would be covered by Marian from our end of it. And of course, all this is really overseen by a delivery board, which basically looks at how things are really coming together. And then I have really already covered it, and each of these work packages really focus on sort of a subset of the overall problem. Particularly, for example, if you look at the work package 1, that focuses on the scalable benchmarks. Work package 2 is very much about how do we actually integrate the AI and hardware together to kind of get them into scale. So one of the key focus of that one is the co-design, and which is particularly Bob and Raja would cover the storage side of the story, how that really fits into the AI landscape. And work package 3, University of Leicester focused on developing surrogate models effectively to accelerate conventional HPC methods through AI. And of course, work package 4, as I mentioned before, is a knowledge exchange, and work package 5 is very much about how do we integrate all these things together to kind of go further. And of course, needless to say, each of these work packages really are very tightly integrated with each other and working with the community. So the problems we kind of focus on are some very relevant to the scientific domains, but each of these work packages really tightly coupled with each other to kind of make any advances on it. And there have been a large number of partners, starting with the original funders, Alan Turing, and then, of course, local facilities, including Diamond. I haven't specifically mentioned other STFC facilities because we are STFC, and that covers ISIS neutron source and CLF and other STFC facilities, but also includes other national labs as well, most of the US labs and other companies as well, and Dirac, of course. Slightly messed up, but and in terms of overview, what we have really achieved. So apart from the software side of it, what we have achieved is quite a lot in terms of the overall impact of it. So the original benchmarking activities were funded by a Turing program, Turing AI for Science program, which is very remarkable and very significant in terms of kickstarting the whole set of activities, which is roughly about a £4 million program to kind of kickstart the whole AI for science, and particularly the benchmarking was a very cornerstone activity of that program. And then we had the base 1 in 2020, and then base 2 in 2022, and so those were those basically gave us a very serious momentum to kind of get this kickstarted. And the activities of the base 2 particularly were very instrumental in terms of development of further grants and further programs, and not just the funding, is actually the underpinning the capability of various programs we had. For example, AIS is a international program with the US colleagues, AI for realistic science, and then followed by we had the bioimaging program with UKRA India, which is very much about how do we use imaging techniques for understanding microscopic images. And also we had a very large scale sort of a £4 million program on the NPRAISE, which is about training or upskilling data scientists or research software engineers and AI for science. And again, benchmarking will be playing a key role on that one. And then very recently, the Cambridge Run initiative, Living Benchmarks, again, the base 2, base 1 and Turing initiatives are very contributing towards all these things. And of course, I haven't included everything in there. I have included only the very significant one, which are worthy of mentioning. But you can already see some of the activities we have done, sort of getting into inroads of areas of the programs and underpinning some of the capabilities of it. And in terms of real publications, it's a very early on, and most of the papers are still in review. So I sort of included the papers which sort of accepted so far from various work packages. But of course, from my understanding, there are roughly about 3 or 4 papers already in review, and more papers to come through. So it takes time for the publications to appear, but at least these ones are in very these outcomes are very published in very decent venues, including in Nature Machine Intelligence or ICMLA or JCP. So it's pretty amazing in terms of the outputs getting into these ones, Marian. And also has resulted in a very significant amount of collaborations. I don't want to really list all the collaborations that really base 2 basically brought. So these collaborations are not just for STFC per se. This is right across the whole organization, right across the all partner institutes that really worked on this one, and the sort of fostered a very strong collaborations with other benchmarking initiatives right across the world. And these collaborations actually playing a very significant role in terms of us going forward and how do we actually take this forward. And of course, the question is, we are coming to the end of the base 2 program, and of course, given that there's no clear indication of where the Excalibur program will be in the next generation. So we are very keen to kind of build the outcomes and then to kind of look forward to the way of really sustaining some of the developments we have done. And of course, there are other initiatives that's going on. For example, Living Benchmarks is one of them that basically trying to sustain some of the things all these Excalibur programs or benchmarking programs have done so far. And of course, there will be other initiatives over time, and we intend to kind of exploit them as much as we could. But the idea is we, as a community, we might want to stay in touch together to see whether we could actually sustain some of the developments we have done, and then to kind of work together to drive the AI for science benchmarking. Thank you. That's all from me. And then I'll hand it over to Yuri.
So, can I start talking? So I'll be talking about hands-on experience on benchmarking in phase 2. So the idea was to produce a detailed survey of machine learning applications with exascale relevance across multiple scientific domains. So and to produce at least 2 or maybe more exascale relevant AI applications drawn from different scientific domains and implement it on a large scale multi-GPU systems. And the further ambition was to produce a high-level tool for estimating the device usage based on the model and the input, and combine the system parameters with the application parameters. Next slide, please. So we conducted a survey of potential benchmarks so we can identify blueprints, commonalities, some patterns, learn some lessons, then released a pre-exascale benchmark suite, which is based on an initial set of benchmarks developed in the phase 1. It was a good learning curve because we learned how to deploy applications, how to set the environment, the conda environment, how to sort out synchronization, communication, and so on. So, and these benchmarks, there's about 6-7 benchmarks. They are drawn from material sciences, environment sciences, particle physics, astronomy, large sciences. Environmental sciences, that's okay. Could you go back to it? All right, for the next one, please. That's all right. So the survey, we surveyed, we read many papers and across the landscape, identified 24 candidates with a potential of exascale potential based on the flop count, and identified domains, 5 different domains like material sciences, life, earth sciences, high energy physics, and large language models. They came late. So the way how we did that is we read the papers and we look at how the runtime was reported. I must say that in most of the papers, the way how the runtime is reported is not very rigorous. What they say is that we were running this application for 2 weeks on 500 GPUs, let's say. And based on that, I mean, that was the only reporting. It's not very engineering. So we looked at that. So if they were running it on, let's say, 500 GPUs for 2 weeks, we looked at the flop rate of these GPUs and estimated the scale of the problem they were running, whether it's an exascale or less than exascale. And then we looked at it, whether the code is available. We didn't develop this code. These are big codes. The data is available, and the documentation. Usually the documentation was a problem, but for all these applications, we established contact with the developers, and they were in communication. So if you had problems with porting or understanding this application, so we could talk to these people, and they helped out a lot. And we are very grateful for this help. Next one, please. So as I mentioned, identified several benchmarks which we try to port, some of them successfully, some of them not, but they're still this ongoing work. So one was a numerical weather simulation that was developed by NERSC, and that was one of the demos at the supercomputer. So we saw that that's a good application, it's a big scale, large input, everything. So we ported it. The next one was from material science. That one is an interesting one because it's a combination of 2 different networks. And then large language models like Olmo. Olmo is an open source, so we can experiment it with the learning. We set parameters, and look at it, how it performs. The next one was Megatron. Megatron was developed by NVIDIA. That's a very interesting environment because it allows to experiment with various parallelization techniques. And then large language models like GPT-2, we had BERT and T5 as well. These are all different language models. They share a lot of common features. And then DeepCam. DeepCam, it's part of ML Commons HPC applications, and Roger will talk more about that. Next one, please. So about the evaluations. So we evaluated these benchmarks on 2 levels. One was a high-level application when we looked at the scalability, and we looked at it how the application scale for the large number of GPUs. The problem with this issue is that it's difficult to interpret the results. And then we developed simple benchmarks, starting from a hardware level benchmarks, and then we went to model levels and so on. And we tried to use these low-level benchmarks to put it together for a bigger picture. This is for understanding what's happening during the runtime. Next one, please. Okay, so first, this is for the numerical weather prediction. This is a large-scale applications, and it's based on vision transformer and the Fourier neural operator. And the data set is a huge data set. It's from satellite images going back years, and the developer is NERC. Code is public. We managed to port it on different machines. Next one, please. So these are the results of porting these applications to 3 different architectures. One was Polaris at Argonne National Lab. The other 2, Summit and Crusher, they were at Oak Ridge National Lab. The people we were working with were very helpful. They provided access to the machines, provided support, and we could communicate with them. So we can see here on the horizontal axis, there's a number of GPUs and the total and the runtime per 1 epoch. There can be many epochs, 100,000 or whatever, until we get the right accuracy. And we can see that Polaris is the best machine, and then we have got the Summit and Crusher. Now at this point, we can just speculate it. Why is it happening? Why is this big difference? So the speculation goes like, because Polaris uses NVIDIA chips, 800 chips, and they are about 30–50% faster than the V100s like Summit. And the Crusher is completely different architecture. It uses AMD chips. So this is just a speculation. We think that the reason is why one machine is faster because the GPUs are faster, but it's not necessarily true. There can be many other things like a memory bandwidth within the GPU, then communication can be I/O and many things. So this is the high level what we can see, and then just speculate it. So if we want to go deeper, then we need to look at the details. So I'll be talking about that later. Next one, please. So this was an experiment running on the numerical weather prediction, and where we have got on the horizontal axis, we have got there the whole time, how long the simulation, the training was running, and here the mean square error for validation loss. And we run it on different sets of GPUs. So on the 32, 64, and 128. And if we run it for about 3,500 seconds, this is the accuracy we can get. It's about 20%, about slightly about 20%. But if we increase the whole time, we can drop down to 15%, which is much better. Now, the interesting thing on this graph is that there's a run for 64 and 128 GPUs, and we can see that there's not a big difference between 64 and 128. This means that we don't need to use as many GPUs. 64 would be sufficient. So I can tell you an example that I run applications from time to time on Frontier, and it's not unusual to see applications which run on 9,000 nodes for a couple of days. That's a huge computing power. But the question is that, do we need these 9,000 nodes? How efficient this runtime is? So I haven't seen any analysis. So this is what we try to do, to go deeper and to analyze where the time is spent, where is the bottleneck, how can it be improved, and how many GPUs actually we need. Next one, please. So this is another application which was identified. This is for material science, and the architecture is a hybrid of graph neural network and the transformer network. It was developed by MIT and NVIDIA. We got a seminar about this one. We implemented the code. We ran it on one of the ANL machines. Next one, please. So this is just the results of implementation running of this Catalyst challenge. It was running on 120 GPUs. You can see it scales well. And the next graph here shows the throughput in images. So how many, as we increase the number of GPUs, the throughput improves. These are good pictures because of the good scalability, but in most of the cases, we don't get such a nice pictures. After 64 or 128 processors, suddenly the runtime starts to grow because of the communication overhead, I/O, or some synchronization problems. Next one, please. Okay, so Megatron is my favorite. It's a rather complicated system, I must say. It was developed by NVIDIA. And the idea is that if we have got very large language models going up to billion or 5 billion parameters, we can't put them on a single chip. So we need to slice it somehow. Either we slice them horizontally, it's called the tensor parallelization, or we slice them vertically, pipeline, or the classical one, data parallelization. So this was just implemented on a small number of GPUs. And you can see here is the iteration time. The larger the package, the batch is much larger here, 128, which scales much better than the small packages. These are small. This is just one iteration because the iteration goes like reading the batch, processing the batch, and then they do back propagation. Next one, please. Okay, so DeepCam. DeepCam was developed also by NERC. This is part of ML Commons set, and Roger will tell more about that. And we use this application for measuring the I/O bottleneck of the system. So how much time is spent in I/O, and then this is a large number of images. They're satellite images with 16 dimensions, and they're looking like parameters like water vapor, wind speed, precipitation, and so on, in order to predict the occurrence of storms, especially tropical storms. The parallelism used in this case is data parallelism. It means that the model is repeated across the GPUs, and just the entire model is exchanged during gradient synchronization. Next one, please. Okay, Olmo is open large language model. It's an open code. It's very good for doing various experiments, especially to investigate the accuracy of prediction and these other things. Now here we have noticed that in the applications, if we manage to use the tensor cores, we get a big increase in performance. It's not always possible. Tensor cores provide usually tenfold increase. For example, if you do matrix multiplications or convolutional networks, it's very good in performance. So we started here, as you can see, 21% is the utilization when you start the tensor cores, but as you increase the number of parameters, you can go it up to 50%, and it gives you a very good improvement. So currently we are working on moving all these benchmarks, trying at least to run them on tensor cores if it's possible. So sometimes we get just 30% improvement, but sometimes 5 or 10 times even better. Next one, please. All right, so this is about the more detailed evaluation, and this is my favorite topic. So the idea is here that once we look at the high level results, like a scalability graph, we can just speculate what's happening. And we don't have a solid numerical evidence some kind of rigorous engineering approach, which would say that the problem is with I/O or with the communication. So we look at three aspects, something like we look at the application and we try to characterize the applications by parameters like precision. That's obvious. That's either 4 bytes or 2 bytes. And then we look at the number of parameters for the model, and then number of samples like images, or a number of sequences if we are talking about large language models. Then we look at the size of in bytes. For example, if I got an image, I can calculate the number of bytes that I need for storing that image, or to move that image from the disk to the GPU and so on. And then we can also calculate the flops per sample. So once we have got one sample, one image, how many floating point operations we need to process that, to go through the entire neural network. Number of epochs. This is what we can't predict in advance because we look at the accuracy. But we can say that we can calculate just one epoch, and we can say that 1,000 epochs, 1,000 times as many. Then byte size and checkpoints. What is good in these things that these are all fixed numbers. They don't change and they don't depend on any system. So we can develop a sort of passport for application on the benchmark, and we list these parameters. So these are the specs. These are the specs for the application. And then from this one, we can calculate the load. By load, I understand the amount of computation, amount of communication, and data movement that I need. For example, if I've got 1,000 images, I know the size of the images, and I know that I need to read it, all these images through the disk. So I know this is the input load. The input load is, let's say, 1 terabyte. So I need to get it through the system. Actually, experience shows that most of the time in this machine learning application is spent in moving the data around rather than processing, moving it through the disk to the GPU, or moving within the GPU memory to the CUDA cores, and lots of time is spent on that. So all these things we can calculate. The only critical one is the memory load, where we need to understand the applications. For example, we have got 3 stages of training. One is the forward pass when you go through the network. Then second is the backward pass, and there's a model update. And all these stages involve operations with large matrices. The weight matrix needs to be read and then updated and written. And it's a huge amount of communication. So for example, if I take a very simple, like 128 sequence, the large language models, which is relatively short, it involves gigabytes, tens of gigabytes of moving data between the GPU and the CUDA cores. And that's why we can talk about memory bound or compute bound problems. Now, the next part is here is the description of the multi-GPU system. Most of the parameters are fixed. They're constant. They don't change, like the number of nodes, GPUs per node, and the memory size. But some of the parameters, they vary. For example, the flop rate. It would be fantastic if we had a flop rate fixed, but it's application dependent, and it's very hard to get that number. I can show you a few examples where the flop rates it depends on the nature of the network and the application which we run. So, and once we have got all these parameters, the numerical values, we try to put them into some kind of expression. This is a very simple algebraic expression. I'm not claiming that this algebraic expression here, which tries to predict the runtime, is accurate. It's definitely not accurate. But what's important here, that the share, that the ratios between these components, like time spent in I/O, memory traffic, communication, and computation, the ratios between them should correspond with the real applications, and at least it gives us some kind of guidance where is the most likely bottleneck and how to address it. Without these numerical values, we can just speculate about the application and its behavior. Next one, please. Okay, so in a detailed evaluation, basically I told everything about this one. Okay, can we go to the next one, please? All right, so to understand full applications which run on hundreds of GPUs is very hard. So we look at the simple ones. This is just an illustration. I've got many other applications. So we look at the simple ones and try to pinpoint what's happening. So this is an example. We have got a machine called Pearl, which runs on NVIDIA A100s. And I was running this application on one node and on two nodes. Each node has got four GPUs. So here there is a batch size. As we increase the batch size, the performance improves. And there's a training time. And as you can see, whether I run it on one node or two node, it makes very little difference. It's almost the same. So there's no point to run it on two nodes. And we would save one node for other purposes. It's the difference is very small. But if we take another machine, which is a Dirac machine, and the parameters are almost the same chips, the same GPUs, the same memory, the I/O is the same, but there is some difference between them. And that's why you can see this gap between the two nodes and one node version. So it's, the two node is much better. And this difference is due to the internode, the bandwidth between two nodes. So in case of Torsa, it's much better. That's why we can see this difference. It was exactly measured and predicted as well. So it compares with the measurements. Next one, please. Okay, so I was talking about the flop rate. We have got lots of these images running for convolutional networks like ResNet and VGG, large language models and others. So in this case, the flop rate varies. So we tried just to have some idea about the boundary of this flop rate. So what can we take? Definitely these are much below the theoretical flop rate, the maximum. Here you have got the batch size increases and the flop rate, the number of flops per second. And we can predict the amount of flops that we need for computing one batch, and also measure it. We used 5 tools for measuring it and compare the predictions with the measurement. So we investigated 4 types of chips: the NVIDIA A100, GH100, the recent one, and then AMD chips, 2 types of AMD chip. And you can see this gap between them, the difference. And in case of BERT, we get about 60 for AMD chips, 60 teraflops per second. But for GPT-2, the same, we have got just half of it, although they are the same language models, but they've got a different architecture. So this just shows that how good is the match between the neural network and the underlying architecture. So we have got lots of these pictures. We come back to them, repeat the measurements, and try to interpret them. What's the reason? Why is this one is better than the other one? Now here we can see clearly that the best is the AMD MI300, and the reason for that is that using large language models involves lots of memory traffic, and these chips have got a much higher memory bandwidth between the GPU and the CUDA cores, and that is the most likely explanation for this difference. Next one. Okay, so about the conclusion, we carry on working in this direction, and the idea is that we take an application benchmark. Let's say we derive all these parameters, try to predict it in algebraic expressions, then we do the measurements and compare the predictions with the measurements. Usually there can be a difference between them, the gap, and we try to understand what's the reason for this difference. Then we either improve the algebraic expressions or measure it again, or just say that, well, we can't predict it accurately. So what is important, we share these results with the ML Commons community. Every week we attend the meetings, every 2 weeks the meetings, and exchange experience and knowledge. Thanks to these community meetings, we have got access to supercomputers, and we can communicate to these people. Thank you very much. I don't have anything else. Yeah.
Okay, I can't see any questions unless Pam can see any questions raised so far.
No, nothing yet.
Okay, so
Thank
shall
you.
we move
Marianne,
then?
sorry, Marianne, I
Yes.
think Victor Chang has raised his hands. So
Oh, sorry, yes, I couldn't see that. Victor, are we able to allow Victor to speak on the webinar? How do we do this, Pam? Okay, what I think I will ask, Victor, would you?
I have added
Hi,
Victor.
Yeah.
Yuri, long time no see.
Yeah,
Uh,
Victor, it's good
yeah,
to
remember,
see you.
I
Good
was
to-
your colleague.
Yes, I know. I
that was-
remember you, Victor. And
I'm not successful. Yeah, I'm not successful yet. Yeah, not like you. You know, I'm learning from you. My question for you are, what are the bottlenecks in your current approach? Because I can see that your current design are relying on 4 GPU architecture. So it looks like, it looks to me, I might be wrong, please correct me. It looks like before you do the experiment, you carefully ensure that each one takes the appropriate workload. But when the workloads or the jobs or the size of data or complexity of the problem goes beyond maybe like more than 5 times than the current capacity, your system might have the challenge to get the results. I wonder what are the bottlenecks and what are your approaches to resolve those issues? Thank you.
thank you, Victor. It's good to see you. Victor, the answer is that if you look at the papers, how benchmarking is reported, usually you don't find this analysis. I went through many papers, and when they say a benchmark, they don't say that this is the amount of data that we need to read, whatever we do, and this is the amount of communication what we need to do. So this is an approach, or some kind of engineering approach when we talk about numbers. Once we have got numbers, then we can put them into expressions and we can compare them. I'm not, as I mentioned, I'm not saying that these are accurate, because the systems are so complex, especially if we will move to a larger number of GPUs. Let's say you're talking about 100 or 1,000 GPUs. Nobody knows what's happening there, how the synchronization works. Some of the GPUs might drop out during a computation. I've seen that, and then they recover. So these expressions are just for our understanding, because if we take the measurements, for example, I remember with this NERC benchmark, I mean, we suffered about 1 or 2 months or even longer just to move it to the machine. It's a big effort. And then we took the measurements, but we didn't really understand what's happening when you use 100 GPUs. You don't know. You take the measurement, and then what you do, you take the benchmarks, you move it on the other machine. And if you're lucky, you sort out the libraries, everything, you take the measurements, and then you say, this machine is better than the others. But we don't have the understanding unless we use this, some kind of algebra or some kind of reasoning. This is where science starts. So we are advocating to follow this path. Where is the bottleneck? Bottleneck is where the time is spent, at least what you think. So we can say that we think that time is spent in I/O, and then we need to prove it. And it turns out that it's not I/O, but communication. Then at least we have got some reasoning. But at present, we don't even reason about these benchmarks. There are many benchmarks. I can name, for example, in ML Commons, there is at least 20 work groups. One of them is our science or HPC or mobile and others. They've got all benchmarks. We have got at least 50 benchmarks. But which is the best, which is the worst, we don't know that. And what's happening with this benchmark is they become obsolete. I mean, sometimes I hear that from NVIDIA and others that don't use that benchmark because it's old. So why is it old? Because there's a gap between the technology and the benchmark. So where is the bottleneck? It depends on the nature of the application. So this is my answer. I mean, unless you take a specific task, you can't say a generic bottleneck that it's I/O. If the application is not reading many images, then there's unlikely to be bottleneck there.
Yuri, I think I'm
Thank
just
you so
conscious of
much. Yeah.
time. I'm
Yeah,
just
sorry for
conscious of
talking so
time.
much.
We've got 2 questions in the chat. Pam, are you able to raise them very quickly? I'd like us to start at 15:15 for the next talk.
Okay. The first question is from Jean Thomas, and it says, "Are you also evaluating the energy spent?"
I'm not evaluating the energy spent, but this would be the next task. So the energy is associated with the flop count. The more you compute, the more energy. So this is what we think. We haven't evaluated energy list.
Okay. And the second question is from Fuzan. He says, "You calculate TCOM and TMEM and TCOM with an XREM. I know this is not supposed to be accurate, but what about overlapping, which could be quite important?"
Yes, overlapping is so what we do in a simple case, it's very hard to predict the overlap. What you say, what happens if we manage to get overlap of 10% of IO and the computation? So what will happen that we do just this what if analysis, but we can't predict the amount of overlap between computation and communication. So that's why this is a very simple model which assumes that there's a clear separation between these stages.
Okay, thank you very much, Yuri and
Thank you.
Jayan. We're handing over now to University of Leicester, Corrigan. I think you're the person taking over.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So I will start with the next slide, I assume. Okay, so welcome everyone. So I will present you our work with the team around Leicester because so at Leicester there is Mark Wilkinson, Shiki Su, Craig Bauer, me, Ali Zahir, Azam Khan, and Ashkan Jum. And we are also working with a cosmologist at Cambridge, including Deborah Sijaki, Martin Bourne, and there is also Jehan that is helping us. So I will present you some work, and my presentation is based on Deborah's slide. So I thank her a lot for the slide she provided. Next slide, please. So to give you some background, so we are interested in black holes here. So this is some very fascinating objects that are lying at the interface of mathematics, physics, and astronomy. So we are interested by jets here. So you can see that there is Cygnus A that has a jet that is launched by a black hole. And you can see that also when there is a black hole that is hitting a nearby star, there is a jet that is launching. So there are some recalls regarding black holes and general relativity and discoveries around that. So Albert Einstein was closely related to general relativity. Stephen Hawking also. Then there was the Nobel Prizes in 2017 around the gravitational wave discovery. And then there was the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2020. I think it was also around general relativity and black holes. Next slide, please. So why the black hole jets are so much important? So we know that virtually every galaxy in the universe hosts a black hole and a jet. So black hole jets profoundly shape galaxy properties and determine how many stars can be formed. So by understanding black holes, we learn about strong gravity limits, so including general relativity and beyond. We can understand high energy astrophysics and particle physics. We can understand stars and how they become black holes. We can also galaxy formation as a whole, and also understand how to use black holes as probe of our universe and cosmology. Next slide, please. So we know that theoretical model of black hole jets match with observation. So on the left side, you have some observation of Hubble and Chandra. And on the left, on the right side, you have some Hubble image. And so Martin and Deborah made some very important contribution regarding the JETS simulation. So next slide, please. So you see that they made very refined simulation. So they are observing several quantities, such as the density, the velocity, the vorticity, the temperature. They are using Voronoi cell mesh, which is a type of mesh where the cells merge or divide. So to make a black hole simulation, you need a huge resolution and HPC resources. So as an example, for one single simulation, you need 30 to 1000 wall clock days on 500 more cores on the entire rack. So next slide, please. So in this project, the idea was to use a surrogate model of machine learning in order to have some more refined simulations. So this will be the work of Craig and Azam was talking about the training on HPC machine and interface. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is the work of Craig currently. So could you go to the next slide also, please? So this slide was to talk about Ali's work. So his work is to optimize energy consumption and data analysis process. So we know that cosmology data require high energy consumption, and we need to find a solution to optimize the energy consumption of the scheduling process using machine learning techniques. Next slide, please. So there is an issue in the presentation. I try to put the slide because so we need to. There is the presentation of Craig, and they are not in the next slide. So
Do you have the slides, Corriton, you would like to
could you
share
turn on,
either your screen
or maybe- no,
instead?
Could you tell that again, Marion, please?
Sorry, would you like to share, if you're missing some slides, would you like to share your screen?
So
Because
Ali
I'm
can
sharing from a
also-
local copy I downloaded this morning.
Okay. So maybe Craig, this is the work of Craig now, so Craig can share his slide.
I can do that, that's no problem.
Thank you, Craig.
Can I double check? Can everyone see my slides?
Yeah, we can see the deep OJET slide
Great.
with the video. Yes, thank you.
So this is our work on a surrogate model of the application that Corentin has just described in terms of simulating the jets at the center of active galactic, at the center of active galaxies. And we've got a sequence of what are called snapshots of the jet density and the surrounding density of the medium around the black hole. We've got a sequence, in this case, we've got a sequence of 108 snapshots. We are doing simulations at a initial resolution of 512 by 512, and Deep OJet is essentially a deep operating network, which has already, certain types of these networks have already been mentioned in the presentation. But this one in particular is a mesh agnostic upscaling and downscaling deep operating network, particularly for simulating active galactic nuclei jets. It consists of three main parts. A deep ONet, which is where this type of architecture originates from. It originally has two parts called a branch and trunk network. We've added an additional part, so we're also taking in the relationships of the actual solutions to the system that we're inspecting, in this case the density field, the geometry that those solutions have been taken on. So in this particular case is a Voronoi mesh, and we're also including as an additional set of relationships the parameters that we can change when we're running different simulations. One particular case of this is the actual jet power that the likes of Deborah and Martin would like to understand how changes to the jet power affect the overall distribution of density in the jet itself. And fortunately, they are working. I wasn't sure if they were going to work, but in the bottom row of images that are showing animations of the different simulations that we're running, we've got the original, which is the fourth one along, at a resolution of 512 by 512, and we've trained our model using this high resolution data in order to be able to downscale to, in this case, 128 by 128, and be able to produce simulations that are of sufficient quality to not need to run a full simulation on HPC at such a high resolution. The reason we do this is when we're running at a lower resolution on HPC, some of the physics phenomena that is observed at higher resolutions is lost when we downscale to a lower resolution. However, using this approach, we can retain that physics, but still run it at the lower resolution and obviously the lower computational cost. So we've got a couple of plots on the screen as well. The one on the left is showing the evolution of the jet length through the different snapshots in the simulation. The black line is the original. The red line is the downscaled slice that we're taking at 128 by 128. And the blue line is our predictions, which are getting to within 90% of the original, and they're within 4% of the actual sliced 128 by 128 solutions. When we look at the overall average density as a whole, our solutions are slightly more accurate than running the simulation on HPC, but at a lower resolution. So what we're able to do is not only downscale, but we can also upscale to reduce the computational complexity, but keep the key physical characteristics of the simulation itself, and downscale and not lose the physics, mostly because it's slightly more complicated, but essentially it's truncation errors based on the approximations to the solution to the differential equations that we're trying to solve. Next slide, please. Oh, I'll say next slide. These are my slides. I forgot about that. So one thing that we are finding as a challenge is something called spectral bias. And this is where the neural network itself learns the more high frequent occurrences of the characteristics in the simulation rather than the things that don't happen that often. And that's why we see, particularly in the early stages of this animation, there's a difference in the central red, which is the higher density area around the black hole. It's actually learning what it sees more often from other later snapshots rather than what is actually happening in the original. So that's something for future work. There's very new work on what are called multi-scale neural networks, which take a trained neural network and then train a new neural network based on the errors that are apparent in training the initial neural network. And you can propagate that several times and try and minimize the errors and training data rather than the actual solutions to the differential equations themselves. And the nice thing.
So Craig, thank you. I think that's the end of your slides. I think I'm handing over to Ali next.
Yes, that's right.
Ali, are you okay to share your screen?
Yeah, can you hear me? Is my mic
Yes,
working? All right,
perfect,
let me
thank
share
you.
my screen.
And after this, we will have a short break, a comfort break, so everyone knows.
Sure. Can you please guys confirm that? Can you see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Okay,
Thank you.
so thank you, Craig and Quarantine, for giving a bit of explanation of what we are doing. My work is kind of more related to how these cosmological simulation surrogate models are performing in terms of time and how we can optimize their energy processes, because all these experiments, such as like if you talk about CERN Alice experiment or any large-scale distributed application system, they contains multiple workflows, data analysis workflows, which basically requires a high amount of input data. So we need to have some sort of an efficient task scheduling mechanism to basically improve the time. But when we talk about optimizing the time in any of the intelligent scheduling system, we end up giving up like loads and loads of energy. It generates massive energy. So the idea was to find an optimized solution, which basically save time, but it should like be more focused on energy as well. So that sometimes we are willing to sacrifice some of the time, but if we can achieve more energy consumption, like we can reduce the energy footprint, so it can be a good solution for the overall problem. So this is just a generic workflow execution process, how these workflow works. They contain multiple tasks in it. We have divided into 5 different categories: inventory construction, trajectories, collision points, particle recognition, anomaly detection. These basically are divided upon their difficulty level or resource utilization level, that how much resources are required by different workflows. Then there requires an scheduling mechanism. Each workflow and task has an execution time, and then obviously it has its energy impact as well. So we have came up with these 4 or 5 scheduling strategies. Basically, we developed these strategies for this problem. The first one is basically locality-aware scheduling. It performs scheduling on the basis of the locality of input data. So rather than it has to wait for the data to come from the storage to the memory, and then it executes. Rather than, so memory have to discard the data, but if the next task which is coming, it has the same requirement as the previous one, so it will keep that data into the memory, and then after the execution of all those tasks which has a similar requirement, it will discard it. Then we added like prefetching part with this locality-aware scheduling. So it is like that. It is the prefetching is the top of another added advantage on the locality-aware scheduling. And after that, we perform a speculative-aware scheduling, which basically speculates the task based on their historical logs that, okay, these tasks are coming in this specific pattern. So it basically prefetched its input data before its arrival. So that's how, we save execution time a lot, because execution time or turnaround time contains IO time, waiting time, and execution time. but the waiting time is like the 80% of in any execution process. So, and then at last, we propose this energy-aware scheduling, which is basically the first three techniques are more focused on time, but the last one basically it balances between the time and energy. So when we were running these experiments, so this is one of the energy matrix of one of our system, how it is performing while we are running those workflows. You can see that the CPU is taking like the most power in terms of all the peripherals which we have in the systems, which is close to like 30 to 40% of the overall power consumption resources. So right now in these experiments, our target was to target to improve the CPU consumption. So we calculate the energy of the workflow processes through these energy consumption matrices. These are basically generic energy equations that how power and energy, how we can calculate the energy of any workflow through the power, voltage, and current. And we as an added thing in this case, we have included a computational fluid dynamics equations, which basically gives us the whole heat mapping of the energy process, that how if the systems are running workflows, they are consuming power, they are generating more heat. So how we can calculate that heat? So we have got these equations, and then we basically fed these equations to our system, which I will explain in the later stages. So this is basically how we calculated the overall energy processes, energy of the overall system. So up till this point, we have introduced different scheduling strategies, which will be working on different workflow scenarios. Each workflow contains different tasks, and so what is the turnaround time of a single workflow along with its power consumption as well as its total energy consumption? So in this case, we can see that if we talk about the basic, like first FCFS, everyone knows about this. So first come, first serve, locality-aware scheduling, prefetching, links, speculation. These are all in an ascending order situation, which is like the down we goes, it is more optimized towards time. But the thing is, if we are, as I said before, if we try to optimize the time, but on the other hand, we end up giving more energy. So we need to find some sort of balance between time and energy, so that, we need to tell them, okay, if this workflow is coming, what is the best possible configurations of a system for this specific workflow on which it saves time as well as energy as well. So what we did was, since the scope of our experiments were kind of limited, we didn't have much real data. So what we came up with this idea is that the data we have through the computational fluid dynamics, through different scheduling techniques, so we have gathered around time and energy data. We gave that energy data to a variational autoencoder to generate more data, like synthetic data, through which we can do some predictions in terms of different workflows, that, okay, if this is the workflow, if these specific type of workflow requires these resources on which they can perform at their best, both in terms of time and energy. So we have generated massive data from this physics-informed variational autoencoder, and those CFD equations and those energy equations, we basically feed those equations to the loss function of the autoencoder, so that it should restrict, rather than generating random synthetic data, it should restrict itself to a specific domain, so that we end up not getting like crazy values, crazy data. So, and then obviously, again, as I said, we can't afford to have different values which are unsuitable for the system, such as, for example, if I say that we reduce the operational configuration of a system, or maybe the CPU frequency of a system, to achieve the energy consumption, to optimize the energy consumption, but it should be in a certain levels. For example, if the clock speed is 2 gigahertz and we end up reducing it to 20%. So that is like 1.6 gigahertz. Now, the thing is, if the system is running on 2 gigahertz, and if we reduce it to 1.6 gigahertz, obviously it will have an impact on those other systems, which on the in terms of it will impact on the time, but we will save some energy. Now, the thing is, there are some workflows which are fine. In case we are fine with that, okay, we can sacrifice 5% of the time. But if we end up getting like more energy saving, so it is good for the overall process. So in case of error handling, in this case, we restricted our system so that it should not generate the data, synthetic data, which is like more than 20% reductions or less than 5% reductions. Because if the system reductions are less than 5%, it won't have impact. It won't save any kind of energy. Although it will be very good for the time, but the energy won't have any effect. So, and on the other hand, if we reduce it to like more than 20%, it is going to severely impact the performance of the system, but obviously it was good for the energy. So we just came up with this range. Obviously, and it depends upon the different types of workflows. Different workflows can have a different operational configuration requirements. And so in our experiments, those 5 workflows, we proposed different operational configuration scenarios for or these workflows. These were this is the experimental environment on which we have used to perform our experiment. I've used Proxmox cluster. It was basically simulation work. So again, we have got workflows, different scheduling strategies. The data generated by this in terms of time and energy, we use that as a real data, and then we fed that data to our autoencoder part to generate different operational configuration scenarios. For example, in terms of time and energy, then we perform uncertainty quantification, and then at the end of it, we got a sweet spot. We call it a sweet spot, which is basically the optimized operational configuration for any specific workflow. These are the final findings of our experiments, that which workflow is performing how in terms of operational configuration reduction. For example, if we reduce the configurations or CPU frequency to 20%, 15%, 10%, or 5%, what is the impact on time? And what is the respective impact on energy? So that's how we got this whole data. We have got loads and loads of data in this scenario. And then after performing some analysis and bootstrap resampling, we came up with this final solution in just for the case of workflow 1, that if we reduce the overall percentages to 15%, the operational configurations to 15%, like the CPU clock cycle, it has impact on energy is up to 10%, that we end up saving 10% energy by giving up only 5% turnaround time. So that it means if we are willing to sacrifice 5% of turnaround time, but we end up saving 10% of the energy of the overall workflow process. So this is the example of just one case. Again, each workflow can have different requirements, different scenarios. So for example, there's workflow 2, workflow 3. We have got all these results, and the thing is, the plan is the experiments are so generic. So for example, if a new workflow X comes in, we can even propose the best operational configuration for those workflows as well. So yeah, that's from me up till now. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. I think we'll do questions. We'll do questions right at the end. I think Assam and Coriton now I'm handing back to.
Okay, so I will try to share my screen. And oh, yes.
Yeah.
So Azam will present his work.
Yeah, that looks good. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's Azam. So one part of our project was to train the model, and the model which Craig talked about, we trained it initially, like for the smaller data set, we tested the training on a single GPU machine, but the overall data set was really huge. So we had to train this model on Tursur's HPC, and we did leverage parallel training on this multi-GPU, multi-node setup. But the thing is that we learned a lot of things during the training process, as well as Judy was talking about trying to figure out the relationship among different parameters that affect the cost of training and the resource utilization. We did learn a few things as well, but I'll come back to code optimization and efficient resource utilization after having explained the kind of interface we made for this. It was kind of a web interface which we used of course, for our internal use, to host the train model for inferencing and to basically visualize how the simulation looks like in the end. So I've just created a small video explaining how it works in real time when we use it. So once the inferences have been made and the snapshots are available, you can just use this interface to visualize how it looks like. And yeah, so basically during the training process, we did also learn that not just the number of GPUs and the resources, like just increasing the resources does not always have a good impact. There are other things as well. For example, one of the things that I noticed was that the type of input data set does have an impact on the training time and resource utilization. And in this particular case, initially we were using the HDF5 file formats as an input, but then when we converted them to TF record files, it did have a really good impact on the training time and resource utilization for TensorFlow based application. But because resource utilization and the stuff was not our main goal on this side, we have kept it for our future work, and we will keep investigating this. That's it from my side. I'll hand over to Karan. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Adam. So I will conclude. So Craig discussed about his AI techniques. So he introduced a deep operator network for mesh agnostic upscaling and downscaling of AGN jet simulation. So he has some variable and associated coordinate geometry separately encoded into two fully connected multi-layer perceptron networks that are called VariableNet and GridNet. He has a model trained to the next predicted snapshot for any given resolution. He's able to upscale to higher resolution significantly, reducing computational complexity while retaining key physical phenomena. Is able also to downscale and retaining key physical phenomena lost when running a simulation at lower resolution. Adam talked about the model training on HPC and the interface. And Ali was talking about optimal operational configuration adjustment. So he has 15 reduction in CPU frequency using the SAS scheduling technique that can increase energy consumption by up to 10% with only a minimal 5% increase of the turnaround time. And I like that this is very specific to the workflow. So thank you again for your attention, and feel free to ask a question.
So thank you very much for all the presenters we've had so far. Pam, are there any questions in the Q&A?
Yeah, we have one question in from Victor. I'd like to ask if you publicly available data sets or mixture/combination of synthetic and real data rather than 100% on synthetic data?
I think that is for me. So the thing is that we haven't used public available data because we have performed our own experiments. We have the scheduling algorithms. We build those algorithms, and after executing them, we have got so much data, and then we have energy consumption metrics through which we find the energy consumption of those workflows. That's how we calculated the real data of our experiments, and then on the basis of those that's what we call real data, because it contains the time and real time and energy consumption of those workflows. After that, we have used that real data to fed it to the autoencoders, and which basically end up generating synthetic data. So this is the overall workflow, how it is working right now. I hope I am clear now.
Okay, I think we'll make a start. This is the second part of the session, and we've got 2 more talks based on work package 3 and 4, and then time at the end to hopefully have more questions answered, and from Mark Wilkinson to wrap up the event. So Bob, I'll hand over to you next.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. We need to.
Okay.
Okay. So this work was in 2 parts done by Gwen Dawes, who did all the difficult Linux stuff, and me, who essentially just ran the Excel spreadsheets and did the talk. Next slide, please. So this slide is to explain why we ended up focusing on a single node performance, and that started because there's a general perception of AI workloads that they're single node. Normally, they quite often use local data, even though the I/O can be intensive, and the data sets can be small. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we thought, okay, at first, we'll see if everything works on a single node, as we expect. This is all on a Lustre file system from a single Ponte Vecchio node in Dawn. Next slide, please. Okay, so the theoretical performance we should get is the client's connected at 4 times 200 gigabits a second. So in theory, it should be able to give us 100 gigabytes a second. The Lustre file system we're using is NVMe based and has considerable performance and is not used at the moment. So according to the numbers we've got, it should be able to do streaming throughput at about 1.5 terabytes a second to 1.7 terabytes a second read. And so based on that assumptions, we thought, okay, with our single node, we should be able to easily saturate its links, its 4 links, and run at 100 gigabytes a second. So we just run a quick IOR write check, and we got the next slide, please. So all these graphs, so we've normalized the vertical scale to 100 gigabytes a second, so we know that that's what, in theory, this node should be able to do, and the scale's on 100. And then the horizontal axis is MPI ranks. There's 96 cores in these nodes, so in the middle of that scale is when we start to double up on the cores. But the most important thing about this is you see that we're suddenly seeing 20% of the performance. This was a bit unexpected. We were expecting way above that, obviously, 95%. Can I have the next slide, please? So we started to think, why? Why is this? But we've had some clues before. We checked the interfaces to make sure, because we thought, oh, 20%, that's kind of suspiciously like a quarter of the performance. So it's only using 1 of the 4 links available to it. But that was not the case. We could see traffic going everywhere. However, we had, when we were running IO 500 about 5 years ago, experienced some issues with the page cache. We had to run multiple mounts to try and get the IO 500 to maximize. Also, other file systems we've been working with have shown to work much better with a direct IO mount option than this one. This is Weka FS, has a direct IO mount option, and performance gets much better when you do that. And also there's the appearance of a feature in the very latest Lustre of hybrid IO, which essentially also avoids the page cache to a large degree. It sends some IO direct. So we thought, okay, maybe it's something to do with the page cache and direct IO. Can I have the next slide, please? And lo and behold, when we run IOR with a direct IO option, we get much better scaling. It runs up to 85, and in the configuration we're running, that's pretty much what the maximum we'd expect. So that obviously thought we can have the next slide, please, Mary. Why is this happening? I mean, there's clearly a bottleneck in the page cache. Next slide, please. So this is where computationally I start to feel very inadequate, because this model is not quite the same as simulating a galaxy. So what we just worked at these assumptions, that we assumed that you could write to the page cache very fast. So the rate into the page cache is the number of ranks times a single thread rate, and that is determined by a DD, single core DD. So we're not stressing anything, that's just as fast as a single core thread can go. Next slide, please. And then that continues until cache is full, which is in principle a kernel parameter. Then the rate changes, and it's determined by the rate that the kernel can empty the cache. So you have two rates involved, initially filling it and then emptying it. Can I have the next slide, please? And here's the model. So the green rate, as seen by the benchmark, is essentially a moving average of the first rate, which is the fast rate determined by the number of MPI ranks times the DD rate, which was measured to 1.3 gigabytes a second. Thereafter, the rate is determined by the cache drain rate, and that was measured to be at about 8.3 gigabytes a second. And the page cache size was measured to be 380 gigabytes. This is against time, but the apparent rate very quickly normalizes the rate that so after about 100 seconds it doesn't change very much. So all the measurements after this are taken after 100 seconds, and we're calculating this apparent rate at 100 seconds. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so up to 64 cores, it works. We're not adjusting any parameters here. These are just measured numbers going into this model. And as far as I can see, that's pretty good. It determines the saturation, it determines the point, the number of processes at which it starts to saturate, and the level at which it saturates. Can I have the next slide, please? However, then when you get above 64 cores, it deviates significantly. Can I have the next slide? So that may be down to several things. The assumptions we made are extremely simplistic. We're assuming that the page cache size is constant, and that's not constant. I know it can burst. I think it's a kernel parameter which says what it can burst, and that we observed it burst to up to 500 gigabytes, but only briefly for a few seconds. The single thread performance that we're assuming will not be a constant. it will change as the thread approaches the number of cores. As context switching basically means that it will slow down. That doesn't necessarily, it will change. And the cache drain rate is not constant either. So if you measure it, it varies. Quite why it varies, I'd have to talk to a kernel programmer, but you see from 7 to 9, most common is 8, the mean is 8, so that's the one we used. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, that's all very interesting, but to get this single node performance up, we need to avoid the page cache, it seems. So how do we do that? Next slide, please. So we could rewrite all our code with POSIX O direct set on our open system calls. So that is, well, ouch, is what is a direct quote from some people I spoke to. It's not trivial in Python anyway, Python, and if we're talking AI workloads, it's all Python. And this is something I learned, it's not a guarantee. And if you open a file with O direct, it's just a hint to an OS saying, please don't use the page cache. It doesn't necessarily mean it will do it. There are file system options. Weka has a direct IO mount option, as I said. That it would be useful to have in other ones. Other file systems may use the page cache differently. But what I'm referring to there is, I know GPFS uses a fake lock device, and that would operate in a very different way in kernel terms. But we haven't had time to look into that, but it's a possibility. But the one we're going for is Lustre has hybrid IO as of 2.16.1, which I think is wet behind the ears, literally just been released a month or two ago. Next slide, please. So what that does is, behind the scenes, it ignores the page cache and will send IO direct to the servers. But it doesn't do it for everything. The assumption is that small IO goes to the page cache because you're never going to fill it up with small IO, and you still get the speed improvements from using that. And the cutoff point between those two domains is a configurable parameter in Lustre. Next slide, please. So this is we switched benchmarks to FIO from IOR before, and this is essentially for convenience and speed. FIO is just easier to get the numbers out. So this is the baseline without, on the normal Lustre, 215.4. Can we have the next slide, please? And this is FIO on with the two graphs there. The top one is when we're switched on hybrid IO. The bottom one is FIO benchmark when we have not switched on FIO. Neither of these have used Directo option for FIO. So basically, we are seeing a significant speed up compared to with the hybrid IO switched off, without having to change the code. So this next slide, I'm going to please. Yeah, so there's no code changes. It still doesn't work as well as if we run FIO on the 215 Lustre with a direct flag. However, we didn't do any tuning of the hybrid IO profile, so we may well be able to speed that up. Yes. And also, we concentrated entirely on write initially because that makes thinking about the page cache easier, and also it was just the first anomalous number we came across. So last week I did a very quick check on read performance, and the effect is the same. We have not had any. Next slide, please. It needs further work. We haven't tested with hybrid IO, and we haven't modeled the behavior in this case, but for certainly for AI workloads, it will still be significant because it's there for read. Next slide, please. So the conclusion we've come to is that if you've got nodes where your connection to the storage can potentially outgun your page cache, we might have to think about some ways of mitigating this issue. Then I've said connections greater than 25 gigabytes a second. That's based on what we see and the saturations we see. It may be lower or it may be higher depending upon your hardware. It affects both the read-write performance, and implementing direct I/O code on system in the file system can improve the situation. And next slide, I think, is the last one. Saying questions. No. Back one slide, I think.
Thank you very much, Bob. I thought we might keep the questions right to the end after Roger's talk.
Okay.
Roger, are you okay to come on now? Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, definitely.
And we'll take questions at the end then.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you. Yeah.
So this is a continuation from some work that we did earlier in the year, actually. So I know Yuri's talked to it about DeepCam. So I looked at it in a bit more detail, some of the DeepCam algorithm that we've been this BenchNet that we've been looking at, benchmark. So, but at Cambridge, so we have a new system at Cambridge called Dawn, and so the idea was to look at an existing system that we have, which is based on Ampere nodes, the NVIDIA Ampere nodes, and we were going to compare that with some an NVIDIA system, which is Ampere nodes are an NVIDIA system, and Intel is Dawn. So we've got these two systems, and we want to compare between the two. And we were particularly interested in the I/O bottleneck. And like any kind of training sort of benchmark that we have, there's a training process and then a validation process. So for the next slide, please. So as Yuri said, DeepCam is part of the MRPerf HPC benchmark suite, and it's effectively looking at a climate model. Yeah, and so it's designed to address challenges in climate science and the prediction of different weather patterns. The next slide, please. So there's a number of different sort of attributes associated with the dataset that comes with DeepCam. So DeepCam comes with its own dataset. It comes with in the HDF5 format. It's got a number of classes associated with it. It's got background images, it's got atmospheric river images, and it's got cyclonic images as well. So the total data set, it's not a particularly big data set, it's about 183 gigabytes. There's about 3,072 files, and they're evenly split into training and validation groups. So if you were to look at one file, you would see what you can see in that figure there. You can see the HDF5 is like a data set, and it has a number of different attributes associated with it. So you have a data attribute, which is an image. You have a couple of labels as well, and some other statistics. So you get these vectors of different sizes effectively. So you've got 3-dimensional vectors, 2D vectors, and 1D vectors. Next slide, please. So like a lot of this stuff, it's dead simple to run. So I've been running it through the Python command line, and because Python scripts, and obviously like any other kind of command line type thing, you get past it a number of different parameters which you can modify. So perhaps some of the ones we were most interested in was local batch size and the number of internal threads, which effectively translates to the number of workers that are potentially working on the job. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as I said before, we've got a number of different hardwares here. I have been looking at some different hardwares, and not at Cambridge, but this particular presentation is mainly about the stuff in Cambridge. We have these Ampere nodes, like I said, they're NVIDIA's, so they have A100 GPUs on it. We also have this new system called Dawn, which has these Intel data center GPUs, which they are quite different. It's been a very interesting process to learn the differences between the two. Yeah, next slide, please. So perhaps one of the most important things that I thought was to get the software stack that sits behind the actual benchmark the same on both environments. So there's a lot of stuff sort of pre-written packages that are very suited to the NVIDIA, but not so many that are suited to the Intel GPUs. And for any kind of comparison, I tried to get this very similar or the same packages across both different platforms. So I had these, used Anaconda, and I had this type of package installed. I had TensorFlow, TensorBoard. This is very important for the Intel type stuff, this Intel extension for PyTorch and the Intel extension for TensorFlow. I didn't so much look at the communication between GPUs, but what you also need just to get it running on the first instance is this one CCL bindings. So often that when you're working with NVIDIA stuff, that comes pre-installed, but I had to compile that from source and get it going on the Intel, on the PVC stack. Next slide, please. So there's a number of different things I was looking at. I just wanted to look at very simply and just create some sort of profiles to get an idea of where bottlenecks were that were associated with the DeepCam algorithm. And to do that, all I did was just add some timing statements at different points in the code. Next slide, please. So to do that, again, thinking back at the different hardware stacks, with the benchmark itself, the DeepCam benchmark is, I think it's been mainly run on NVIDIA-based hardware stack. So what I had to do was I had to look at the command line parameters that are going into it and just make sure that some of that stuff would run on both systems. And to do that, I changed the optimization scheme. So the default is this LAM implementation here, which is NVIDIA specific. So I just changed that from this LAM setting to Adam. Okay, next slide. And so I did a little timing. So I just broke the code down into some logical sort of functionality, which I thought sort of would be interested to time it, and I put these timer statements in. So this graph that we can see here, this is what you're actually seeing is the two different hardware stacks, but that is the percentage of the time taken for one epoch of the algorithm. So if you look at the red here, that if you added up all the percentages there, across there, that would add up to 100. And obviously you've got the ampere ones in blue, which are behind the actual red ones. But it's interesting to see that the percentage of there's obviously quite a bit of a difference in the percentage of time spent by the two different algorithms, two different software stacks on just the training alone. So as you can see, the PVC, it spends less of its time on the training than what the ampere nodes do in relation to the actual one run of the algorithm. The sort of one step back from that, the ampere nodes are on average faster, but they are spending more of their time on the training than the PVC nodes. PVC are a bit slower, but ampere does appear to be a bit faster on the training segment. Next slide, please. So that in mind, I sort of zoomed in on that in a bit more detail. Same sort of graph here. It's a percentage of the overall time taken on the training component and the percentage of the overall time taken on the validation. And you do get a bit of different behavior between the different hardware stacks, which is quite interesting. Again, if you look at the overall time, the ampere nodes tend to be a bit slower on that, on the training part compared to the PVC. Next slide, please. So I know some of the earlier talks, there was a bit of interesting work going on with in Leicester about looking at the different file formats. I have looked at that before actually, and it was quite interesting. But we've moved on to looking at the different types of data loader. So DeepCam comes with a data loader. I think it's a PyTorch implementation. So what we wanted to do is we wanted just to compare another implementation. So we had the PyTorch implementation. We also had a TensorFlow implementation. Yeah, next slide, please. What we did was, so I just rewrote a bit of code that was loading in the complete DeepCam dataset using the PyTorch implementation, the TensorFlow implementation, but we ran all of this on just the ampere nodes. So this was just the NVIDIA. So we've moved away from the Intel stuff and we were just looking at the NVIDIA stuff. what I was also interested in was looking at the effect of different sort of scales or sizes of data set. So if you remember back to the original HDF5 file, I was looking at just only loading it the labels file, the labels attributes, then I was looking at loading an image attribute, and I was looking at loading the whole data set itself. Next slide, please. So when I'm looking at just loading one label, so I was getting this sort of behavior. So there was a tendency for the PyTorch data loader to start off a bit quicker than TensorFlow, but after about the third or fourth worker, because I'm looking at it based on the number of workers here, then the PyTorch implementation was a bit faster. So beg your pardon. So the TensorFlow always started off a bit faster, but by about the third or fourth, and the PyTorch implementation of the data loader always tended to be feeding the algorithm a little bit faster. Not by much, but again, when you scale that up over the number of iterations and the number of epochs, that would actually come out to be quite a bit, I think. The next slide again, please, Mary. Similar story with the, this is the image data type here. So it's gone from a 1D, to a 1D vector to a 3D vector here, floating point vector. Similar story. The TensorFlow tended to start off a bit quicker, but again, after about 3, 4, 5 workers, then the PyTorch implementation tended to be a bit faster. Next slide. And the same again. So this was the full data set. So this was loading all the different attributes for the whole DeepCam data set. Again, PyTorch was a bit slower. TensorFlow started off faster, but lost that advantage over time. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we were also interested in looking at the I/O libraries that were actually running the data loader. So if you can imagine the data loader itself, it's just like a mechanism. The implementations between PyTorch and TensorFlow, what I've seen, they're very, very similar, but we were just interested in taking a step bit sort of further into it and looking at the libraries that were sitting behind those and actually doing the I/O work itself. And with that in mind, again, we were continuing to look at the Ampere hardware stacks, but we were looking at the HDF5 dataset and what's called ADIOS 2. So if you go to the next slide, please. Yep, so HDF5 and ADIOS 2, based on the DeepCam dataset. This time what I did was I created a dummy dataset, so it was very similar to what we were using as DeepCam, but here I just had a single file. In that single file, it contained 10 attributes that were equally sized. If I remember correctly, they were just 2D vectors, but they were just very large ones. And all I did was I set the number of workers. I didn't vary the number of workers, and I kept the batch size at 1 as well. Next slide. And so by doing that, I was looking at HDF5 ADIOS dataset, and I loading that one large dataset in with those 10 different attributes, just incrementing the number of attributes each time. And the performance was very similar, effectively, very, very similar between these two I/O libraries. Yeah, next slide, please. So again, just that was based on one single file. So I thought, well, okay, I'll just have a look at what happens with multiple different files. So I created another dummy dataset. This was 1.5 terabyte. And then this time it consisted of 200 files. Again, each file can contain 10 different attributes of equally sized vectors. This time I set the number of workers and the batch size to 10. I think that was because it was the default. Next slide, please. And I got a plot like this. So I was only really interested in getting an idea of sort of my foot in the door to see what the sort of differences between the two I/O libraries were based on, rather than a single file, multiple files, and it came up with this. So you can see slight differences there. So you can see some of the, excuse me, the outliers tend to be ADIOS based. So I think HDF5 is a bit more consistent, and when you do have outliers, they were based on ADIOS. Now, I'm sure, as Yuri says, and I'm sure as everybody's aware, there's so many different sort of variables associated with this, and this is just one instance of one data set based on one algorithm. But interesting to see, get a feel of it, and the sort of different components that you can modify, and the sort of output, immediate output you can see. The next slide, please. Yeah, so just some basic observations based on what I've seen, excuse me. So I think with that first couple of graphs that you saw were probably the most interesting thing, where I broke the different algorithm down into the components. I think regardless of the profile, regardless of the hardware stack, the Ampere does tend to be a bit faster than what the Intel stack was. And that was based over the average of 5 epochs. So if you can imagine, if you ramp that up to 200 epochs, or some of these bigger jobs that people have been talking about, that performance difference is going to be actually quite big, definitely over time. The data loaders, excuse me. Again, there's very, very sort of marginal differences between them. But again, once you sort of ramp that up over the increasing numbers of epochs and iterations, those differences are going to creep in there. Similarly with the I/O libraries, one thing I did notice was that with the ADIOS 2, once you read the data set in once, it remains in cache, so it's loaded into the algorithm much more quickly. I think HDF5 there would be an option in there to do that. Again, as we said before, if you do it over a number of iterations, a number of epochs, these differences you would see them in much greater scale. And that is about it from me, I think. Yes, that would be me.
Spot on time. Thank you very much. Have we got any questions at all, Pam?
Not at the moment.
Okay, so I will move on if that's okay with everyone. Please do put questions. We're nearly towards the end of the webinar. So an aspect of the proposal was to include a work package called Knowledge Exchange, Training and Community Building, which very much I was involved with, but it was very much a team effort. So thank you to everyone who supported this. These were some of the milestones. We had to have events, training for some of the actual tooling that was developed. We had a number of placements. We had workshops. An important aspect of this was quarterly dial-ins with different industries, which Jayan and the team led, and international engagements. And Jayan, I think, has already highlighted a number of those in his earlier slides. So to share information, the first task was to build this website, and hopefully all of you are familiar with this website, because this is the main place that we're sharing content following this project, and certainly will be the place where we're actually sharing the actual links to the benchmarks and making these available for all of you to access. So we will share these addresses afterwards with you. We have a YouTube channel and LinkedIn as well, and hope that you'll be able to follow us with that. If there is a base 3, then those will will continue, I hope so. An important part of this was engaging with the Excalibur community and getting involved in the knowledge exchange coordinator calls. We also as well surveyed the Excalibur projects, and we built quite an interesting amount of themes around this, and we were able to gauge data sets for further exploration projects. This was really started at our very first launch project, which was back in 23. We had a number of speakers at that event, and it was a very good starting off the project itself. So placements, we had a number of placements built into this, and we went out with probably 3 rounds of advertising to encourage placements, and we successfully offered placements to individuals from UCL, Bristol, and we currently have just one at the moment from Earlham Institute. And the idea with the placements was to encourage people to come in, spend time with Jayan's team, learning some of the techniques, bringing some of the challenges. Possibly this, this was quite a challenging thing for people to give up time for work. So we tried various combinations of hybrid working with us. So I think, pretty pleased that we got some placements. Probably would have liked to have more placements if possible during the duration of the project. However, the good thing is a lot of this now will be supported by the EPSRC NPRAISE funded projects that Jayan talked about earlier. And we've started to really go out and encourage secondments and placements through that. So a number of workshops and seminars were instrumental really right at the beginning. I won't read all of these, but there were a number of, we offered a number of training sessions for Diamond Light, where DIRAC also engaged with sending people, and we had a number of seminars. Now, all of the content of this you'll find on the AI for Science website, and where possible, we were able to record those and share those seminars. Quarterly dial-ins across the DOE labs in the US labs. We maintain some quarterly dial-ins with a number of companies as well. A lot of these partners provided support from the outset, so that was hopefully a useful thing throughout the project. And these were obviously a number of visits to the US labs. A number of staff actually spent time in the US labs. We were also able to support that further to the AIRS project that Jayan mentioned earlier on. And really, this has been quite an important part to extend the knowledge from the project that's been shared. But finally, this is the bit that everyone wants to know. How do you actually access these benchmarks? We've developed, thanks to Pam. Pam has been instrumental throughout this, developing all of the materials in the background, the website. And she has launched, as of, I think it was yesterday, Pam launched this website. We'll share the link in the chat. So this is where you can get access to the benchmarks. We will be continuing to add material to this website and building the content over time. So we'll share that with you in due course. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the knowledge exchange package, because I want to leave time for questions. And I see that one question has been sent in, Pam, and then we'll hand over to Mark to close the event. Pam, are you able to take over?
Yeah. So the one question we've received is for Bob, I think. For your Climate data sets, will you be able to present outputs in visualization similar to other mainstream or common ways to present outputs?
I think that's for Roger.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
Where's Roger gone? Aha.
So, sorry, say that again.
For your Climate data sets, will you be able to present outputs in visualization similar to other mainstream and common ways to present output?
Like put it on a dashboard type. I guess it's just a numerical output. So if that's what you mean by format it into a certain aspect and putting it into a dashboard, yes, I definitely think it's possible. Because they're just numeric values. So I'm assuming that's what you mean, but yes, I would say.
Thank you. That's the only question we had.
So Mark, can we hand over to you then? I think we've really kept well to time in this case.
Okay, so I will try to not spoil things by overrunning. Could you go back to the previous slide, Marion, please? So there's another question that just appeared. Will there be any funding coming up? Very good question. If anybody has the answer to that, please post it in the Q&A. So I'm Mark Wilkinson. I'm Professor of Astrophysics at Leicester and Director of the Dirac HPC facility. And so I'm just going to say a little bit just to wrap up about the project and say a few thank yous. So obviously it's a very exciting time to be working on applications of AI. And so BEIS 1 and BEIS 2 came along, the funding for them came along at exactly a very opportune time for many of us. Hopefully the presentations you've seen this morning have given you a flavour of what's been achieved in the course of the BEIS 2 and BEIS 1 projects. So first of all, obviously, I'd like to thank all of the speakers this morning, not just for the presentations they gave today, which I think were great and gave a really good picture of what's been done, but also for all the work that they put in over the last couple of years. Without their input, none of this would have happened. So if we were in the room, I'd be asking for a round of applause, but if you can clap quietly to yourselves, that would be fine. You'll have seen in the course of the talks that some kind of common themes are clear. One is the importance of developing a very detailed understanding of the algorithms that we're using in AI and their performance, and that's actually essential if we want to deliver the full benefits of AI in the future, including, as was raised earlier, the issue of energy, managing the energy implications. There's plenty of scope for optimization, and we need to make sure that we're driving that forward in the future as AI becomes more and more used. Another key aspect is the importance of uncertainty quantification, and that's whether it's looking at the performance of the algorithms, the energy use, the models that we're using to model energy output or model the data movement. All of these need uncertainties on them, as well as the uncertainties on the actual AI model themselves. The challenges of data won't surprise anyone, but I think that's something that's come out in multiple ways through this project, is that as in many computational related areas, AI has big challenges around data, whether that's moving data in and out of systems, moving data around systems. And so we had there's still work to do in there. I think there's scope for optimization. But I think AI is clearly going to benefit. It can be used to help us with some of that optimization, I think, and also clearly, as we saw in the middle set of talks, there's scope to use it to improve simulation outputs and the energy output, the energy usage of simulations. So at the start, Jayan earlier this morning thanked all the partner institutions and organizations that have supported BEIS 2. So I want to echo those thanks. We also are very grateful to EPSRC and Excalibur, because that's where the funding came from, and that's really what gave us the opportunity to do all the work that you've seen here. I think Excalibur has been an excellent program, and I think it's generally very widely hoped that there will be a follow-on to that program. Jayan and I also wanted to thank particularly Ashik Anjum, who's in the audience. He's the head of the group at Leicester that did all the work on surrogate models, and essentially he facilitated that work by providing access to a fantastic team. You've seen many of them who gave the presentations earlier, and we were able to get them on board in the BEIS 2 project at very short notice. So we're really grateful to Ashik and of course the team as well, because without their effort, the surrogate model work couldn't have happened. Some other thank yous, Pam Slingsby and Archit Mantri, both from SDFC. I think You'll have heard from Pam, at least in terms of you've seen her today, and also helping to organise today's event. So they're both from SGFC, and they've been great throughout the programme in terms of organising it. We'd like to thank Marion Samler, who you've heard from already today. She obviously she's part of the program team, but has ensured that lots of things happen that otherwise would not have happened. So thank you, Marion, for all your effort and keeping us on track at times over the last couple of years. And I think all of us in the BEIS 2 consortium would like to thank Jayan for the vision and leadership that led to BEIS and the BEIS 1 and then BEIS 2. And the whole program of activities was thanks to his vision. And I think all of us are looking forward to opportunities to continue this work over the coming years. So I'll end by saying, thanking all of those in the audience. Thank you for coming along to this and supporting this event. Please, once today has been recorded, and we'll be making the recording available, so you can signpost other colleagues to watch the talks from today. Please go to the website. I asked Marion to leave it up on the screen, so go to the BEIS website and access the various benchmarks and other outputs from the project. And hopefully keep watching this space for news about BEIS 3 and our plans for that. And with that, I'll thank everyone, and I'll leave it there.